December 16, 1944, the Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Snow covers the ground like a shroud as German General Heinrich von Lüttwitz prepares for what Adolf Hitler calls the Watch on the Rhine. Germany's last desperate gamble to split the Allied forces and turn the tide of World War II. 200,000 German troops, 1,000 tanks, veterans of countless battles ready to smash through what they believe are weak American defenses, but they have no idea what's waiting for them. General Omar Bradley has been quietly positioning 900 artillery pieces across the front lines, more concentrated firepower than has ever been assembled in military history. In the next 10 minutes, 60,000 artillery shells will rain down on German positions. The sound will be heard 50 kilometers away. But here's what the Germans never saw coming. This isn't just about the battle. It's about the machine behind the battle. How did American factories outproduce the entire German war machine by a ratio of 10 to 1? What happens when democracy's industrial might meets totalitarian desperation? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning mist clung to the pine trees of the Ardennes Forest as General Heinrich von Lüttwitz surveyed the terrain through his field glasses. Snow crunched beneath the boots of his aide as reports filtered in from division commanders. The date was December 15, 1944, and the German army was about to launch its final desperate offensive in the West. Von Lüttwitz had seen too many battles, witnessed too many retreats. His weathered face bore the lines of a professional soldier who understood that Germany was losing the war. But Adolf Hitler had ordered one last gamble, Operation Watch on the Rhine, designed to split the Allied armies and capture the port of Antwerp. If successful, it might force the Americans and British to negotiate a separate peace, allowing Germany to focus its remaining strength against the Soviet Union. The statistics seemed favorable. German intelligence reported that only 4 American divisions defended the Ardennes sector, spread thin across an 80-kilometer front. Most were either inexperienced units or battle-worn formations sent to this quiet sector to rest and refit. Von Lüttwitz commanded the 5th Panzer Army, 25 divisions strong, supported by the 6th Panzer Army to his north. Together, they would punch through American lines with overwhelming force. The German general studied his operational map, marked with red arrows indicating planned breakthrough routes. His staff had calculated that with 200,000 troops, 1,000 tanks, and air support from 1,400 aircraft, they could reach the Meuse River within 48 hours. The Americans, caught off guard and outnumbered 5 to 1 in the initial assault zones, would crumble under the Wehrmacht's final fury. Von Lüttwitz dismissed his aide and walked to the window of the farmhouse serving as his headquarters. Through the frosted glass, he could see columns of Panzer IV and Tiger tanks moving into position, their steel hulls painted with winter camouflage. The soldiers looked confident, eager for action after months of defensive fighting. Many were veterans of the Eastern Front, hardened by years of brutal combat against the Red Army. What the German commander could not see were the preparations taking place on the American side of the line. 30 kilometers to the west, another general was making very different calculations. General Omar Bradley stood in the operations room of the United States 12th Army Group headquarters in Luxembourg City, studying intelligence reports with growing certainty. The soft-spoken Missourian had earned his reputation as the soldier's general through careful planning and an intuitive understanding of battlefield dynamics. Now, as he examined German troop movements and radio intercepts, Bradley sensed opportunity disguised as crisis. The German buildup was unmistakable. Aerial reconnaissance photographs showed massive concentrations of armor and infantry massing opposite the Ardennes. German radio traffic had increased dramatically despite enemy efforts at communication security. Most telling were the reports from frontline observation posts. German soldiers had been spotted wearing American uniforms and practicing English phrases, clear indicators of planned deception operations. But Bradley saw something the Germans had missed. While they focused on troop ratios and tactical surprise, the American general understood that modern warfare was increasingly about industrial capacity and logistical sustainability. The numbers told a story the Wehrmacht could not comprehend. In Detroit, Michigan, the River Rouge plant was producing 5,000 Sherman tanks each month. The Chrysler tank arsenal alone manufactured more armor in 30 days than German factories could build in 6 months. Across the American Midwest, munitions plants operated around the clock, churning out artillery shells at a rate that dwarfed German production capabilities. The United States was manufacturing 1.4 million artillery rounds monthly, more in 4 weeks than Germany produced in an entire year. Bradley's aide, Colonel Chester Hansen, entered with the latest production reports from the War Department. The figures were staggering. 300,000 tanks manufactured since 1941, 200,000 aircraft, 6 million tons of artillery ammunition. American factories were outproducing the entire German war machine by a ratio exceeding 10-to-1 in critical categories. The general smiled grimly as he considered these statistics. While von Lüttwitz counted his 1,000 tanks as a formidable force, American industry was simultaneously building 1,500 new armored vehicles. Every day of the German offensive would cost them irreplaceable equipment and experienced personnel, while American factories continued their relentless production. Bradley walked to the wall map showing his defensive positions. The Ardennes sector might appear lightly defended, but he had been quietly concentrating artillery assets for weeks. 900 field guns, howitzers, and heavy mortars were positioned. In carefully surveyed firing positions, their crews trained in unprecedented coordination techniques. When the German assault began, they would face something no army in history had encountered: the full weight of American industrial firepower, concentrated and coordinated with scientific precision. The telephone rang. It was General Dwight Eisenhower, calling from Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. "Omar," the Supreme Commander said, "our intelligence confirms German intentions. They're coming your way in force. Are you ready?" Bradley looked again at the production figures on his desk. "More than ready, Ike. They have no idea what they're walking into." Sergeant Robert Hickman pulled his wool overcoat tighter as he checked the defensive positions of the 28th Infantry Division's forward observation post. The temperature had dropped to minus 15 degrees Celsius during the night, and ice crystals formed on his breath as he spoke to the radio operator. Through the gray dawn light, the Ardennes Forest stretched endlessly, its snow-covered branches creating natural camouflage for both armies. Hickman had been in Europe since the Normandy landings, 6 months earlier. The sergeant from Iowa had seen action at Saint-Vith and in the Hürtgen Forest, experiences that taught him to read the subtle signs of impending battle. This morning, those signs were everywhere. The unusual quiet from German positions, the absence of normal patrol activity, the faint mechanical sounds drifting through the forest, all indicated something significant was developing. The observation post occupied a reinforced bunker overlooking a natural clearing that served as a killing field for approaching armor. Behind Hickman's position, carefully concealed gun emplacements housed elements of the 9th Armored Division's artillery. But these were not ordinary artillery positions. Over the past 2 weeks, engineers had installed sophisticated communication, equipment, and surveying instruments that allowed for coordination with artillery units across the entire sector. What Hickman could not fully appreciate was the revolutionary nature of the defensive system being implemented around him. Traditional artillery doctrine called for individual batteries to engage targets as they appeared, with limited coordination between units. But American military planners had developed new techniques based on industrial production methods and scientific management principles. The artillery positions behind the 28th Infantry Division were connected by telephone lines to a central fire direction center located 15 kilometers to the rear. This facility contained calculating machines, meteorological equipment, and communication systems that could coordinate the fire of 900 guns simultaneously. When the German attack began, every artillery piece within 40 kilometers would receive firing data computed to mathematical precision, allowing them to concentrate overwhelming firepower on specific target areas. Radio operator Private James Murphy received a transmission from Division Headquarters. Charlie 7, this is Thunder Base. Execute Fire Plan Alpha in 30 minutes. Acknowledge. Murphy looked at Hickman with raised eyebrows. Fire Plan Alpha was the designation for the pre-planned artillery response to a major German assault. 30 minutes meant the attack was imminent. Hickman studied the forest through his binoculars, noting movement among the trees. Dark shapes were advancing through the snow, infantry in winter camouflage, moving with the practiced efficiency of veteran soldiers. Behind them, barely visible through the morning mist, came the unmistakable silhouettes of German tanks. The sergeant estimated enemy strength at battalion level, approximately 800 infantry supported by 30 armored vehicles. Standard defensive doctrine would call for his unit to fall back to secondary positions, conducting a fighting withdrawal to preserve personnel and equipment. But this morning would be different. Instead of retreat, the Americans would demonstrate the devastating effectiveness of coordinated industrial firepower. At precisely 0530 hours on December 16, 1944, the German artillery barrage began. Von Lüttwitz's gunners had concentrated every available piece, 350 guns ranging, from light field artillery to massive railway. Cannons in a 30-minute bombardment designed to shatter American morale and communications. The earth shook as German shells impacted American positions throughout the Ardennes sector. High explosive rounds created geysers of frozen earth and splintered trees. The sound was deafening, a continuous thunder that echoed through the forest valleys. German infantry huddled in their assault positions, waiting for the barrage to lift so they could advance across the broken landscape. But as the German guns fell silent and assault troops began their advance, something unprecedented happened. American artillery responded with a coordination and intensity that defied belief. At Thunder Base, the Fire Direction Center, dozens of technicians sat at calculating machines that had computed firing solutions for every likely German approach route. Meteorological specialists provided wind speed and atmospheric density readings. Survey teams had spent weeks determining exact coordinates for target areas with scientific precision. When Sergeant Hickman radioed the coordinates of the advancing German formations, Thunder Base immediately transmitted firing data to 900 artillery pieces positioned across an 80-kilometer front. The calculation that would have taken individual battery commanders hours to complete was accomplished in 90 seconds by mechanical computers and trained specialists. The American response began with mathematical precision. At 6:02 hours, 900 guns opened fire simultaneously. The sound was unlike anything in military history, a rolling thunder that could be heard 50 kilometers away. Windows shattered in villages throughout Belgium and Luxembourg. The ground vibration was so intense that seismographs in Paris recorded the bombardment as an earthquake. In the first 10 minutes, American artillery fired 60,000 rounds. Each shell was precisely targeted using industrial production techniques applied to warfare. The shells themselves represented the output of American factories that operated with efficiency German industry could not match. Every 10 seconds, more ordnance landed on German positions than their factories could produce in a full day. The impact on German formations was catastrophic. The 5th Panzer Army's lead elements, advancing confidently through the forest, were caught in killing fields that had been pre-surveyed and registered by American gunners. High explosive shells burst among infantry columns with devastating accuracy. Anti-tank rounds disabled German armor before crews could identify American gun positions. Private Murphy, monitoring radio transmissions, reported German units calling for immediate withdrawal. "Sergeant," he said, his voice filled with amazement, "they're breaking off the attack. Multiple units requesting permission to fall back." Hickman watched through his binoculars as German soldiers scrambled for cover among the trees. Tanks that had been advancing confidently minutes earlier were now burning hulks scattered across the snow-covered clearing. The few surviving armored vehicles were retreating as rapidly as terrain conditions allowed. The thunder continued for 20 minutes, a sustained barrage that consumed more ammunition than German factories produced in 3 months. When it finally ceased, the silence seemed unnatural after the deafening roar of 900 guns firing in unison. General Heinrich von Lüttwitz stood amid the chaos of his command post, struggling to comprehend the reports flooding in from his subordinate commanders. The Americans were supposed to have minimal artillery support, scattered batteries with limited ammunition, and poor coordination. Instead, his assault divisions were being systematically destroyed by firepower that exceeded anything in his military experience. The telephone rang constantly as regimental and battalion commanders reported their situations. The 2nd Panzer Division had lost 40% of its armor in the first hour of fighting. The 26th Volksgrenadier Division was requesting immediate withdrawal after suffering casualties that made continued offensive operations impossible. Most shocking of all, the Panzerlehr Division, an elite formation, composed of veteran instructors from German armored schools, was reporting complete disorganization under sustained artillery fire. Von Lüttwitz had participated in dozens of major engagements on both the eastern and western fronts. He understood the mathematics of attrition warfare, the relationship between casualties and combat effectiveness. What was happening in the Ardennes violated every principle of military experience. German artillery doctrine emphasized mobility and surprise. Their guns fired brief, intense barrages before moving to new positions to avoid counter-battery fire. This tactical approach reflected resource constraints that forced German commanders to husband ammunition and preserve equipment for maximum effect. The American artillery response demonstrated resources beyond German comprehension. Rather than brief targeted strikes, the Americans were conducting sustained bombardments that consumed ammunition at rates German logistics could not support for more than a few hours. Yet the barrage had continued for 40 minutes without any apparent reduction in intensity. Colonel Wilhelm Wiebig, von Lüttwitz's operations officer, approached with the latest intelligence assessment. "General," he said, his face grim, "our observers count more than 800 American gun positions active in this sector alone. They're firing continuously with no apparent concern for ammunition conservation." Von Lüttwitz studied the situation map, noting the red symbols indicating German units that had ceased reporting. Entire battalions had been eliminated or rendered combat ineffective. The carefully planned breakthrough that was supposed to reach the Meuse River within 48 hours had been stopped cold. In the first 2 hours of fighting, the general understood that he was witnessing something fundamentally new in warfare. The Americans were applying industrial production methods to combat operations, treating artillery fire as a manufacturing process that could be optimized for maximum output. German military tradition emphasized individual initiative, tactical flexibility, and conservation of resources. These qualities, which had served the Wehrmacht well in earlier campaigns, were proving inadequate against systematic application of overwhelming material superiority. A radio operator interrupted with an urgent message from Army Group B headquarters. Field Marshal Walter Model was demanding an immediate situation report, an explanation for the failure to achieve breakthrough objectives. Von Lüttwitz composed his response carefully, knowing that honest assessment of American capabilities might be dismissed as defeatism by higher command. "Operation proceeds according to modified timeline," he transmitted. "Enemy resistance greater than anticipated. Require additional artillery support and ammunition resupply before resuming offensive operations." He did not mention that no amount of additional support could match what the Americans had. Demonstrated, Eleanor Green wiped sweat from her forehead as she supervised the third shift at the Willow Run bomber plant near Detroit, Michigan. The massive assembly line stretched beyond the horizon of the factory floor, where B-24 Liberator bombers moved through production stages with mechanical precision. But tonight, Eleanor's attention focused on a different assembly line, one producing the artillery shells that were, at this very moment, raining down on German positions in the Ardennes Forest. The production statistics were staggering in their implications. Willow Run alone manufactured one 4-engine bomber every 63 minutes, working 24 hours per day, 7 days per week. The artillery shell production line operated with even greater efficiency, completing finished rounds at a rate of 12 per minute. In a single 8-hour shift, Eleanor's workers produced more high-explosive ammunition than German factories manufactured in an entire month. Eleanor had worked in automotive production before the war, assembling components for Ford automobiles using scientific management techniques developed by Henry Ford and his engineers. When America entered the conflict, these same methods were applied to military production with revolutionary results. Assembly line workers who had previously installed carburetors and transmissions now assembled artillery shells and aircraft engines with identical precision and efficiency. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The transformation of American industry represented something unprecedented in military history. Previous wars had been fought with weapons manufactured by traditional craft methods where skilled artisans produced individual items according to established patterns. The United States had revolutionized warfare by applying mass production techniques that treated military equipment as consumer goods to be manufactured in unlimited quantities. Supervisor Margaret Wilson approached Eleanor with the latest production figures. "We've exceeded quota again," she said, holding a clipboard with impressive numbers. "Artillery shells are running 20% above target, and we've got orders for 3 more months at current production rates." Eleanor studied the figures, calculating their battlefield implications. American factories were producing 1.4 million artillery rounds monthly, more than Germany, Italy, and Japan combined. This ammunition was being loaded onto Liberty ships in New York Harbor and transported to European battlefields faster than enemy forces could consume their own limited supplies. The production line, workers, primarily women who had replaced men, drafted for military service, understood that their efforts were directly connected to battlefield success. Radio reports from Europe confirmed that American artillery was proving devastatingly effective against German formations. Each shell assembled at Willow Run represented potential German casualties and shortened war duration. Eleanor walked the production floor, observing workers who maintained quality standards while exceeding quantity targets. These women were mothers, wives, and daughters who had never seen combat, but were winning the war through systematic application of industrial efficiency. Their weapons were micrometers, assembly tools, and quality control procedures that ensured every shell fired accurately when needed. The factory radio announced updates from the Battle of the Bulge, where German forces were being repelled by coordinated American artillery fire. Eleanor smiled with satisfaction, knowing that shells assembled under her supervision were contributing to that victory. The sound of machinery humming through. The night shift was the sound of democracy, defeating totalitarianism through superior industrial organization. General Omar Bradley reviewed the latest casualty reports at his Luxembourg headquarters, noting with grim satisfaction the effectiveness of American defensive preparations. German losses during the first day of fighting exceeded 25% of attacking forces, while American casualties remained within acceptable limits for sustained operations. The Battle of the Bulge was proving to be a decisive demonstration of industrial warfare principles. German commanders had planned their offensive using traditional military calculations based on troop ratios, tactical surprise, and operational mobility. They had failed to account for the revolutionary impact of American production capacity applied to battlefield operations. Bradley's operations staff had compiled detailed statistics that illustrated the transformation of modern warfare. American artillery consumed more ammunition in the first 6 hours of fighting than German factories could produce in 2 months. This expenditure rate was sustainable for American forces because their supply lines connected directly to the most productive industrial economy in human history. The mathematical implications were overwhelming. German industry, operating under constant Allied bombing and resource shortages, produced approximately 10,000 tons of artillery ammunition monthly. American factories manufactured 60,000 tons in the same period, while simultaneously producing tanks, aircraft, and small arms at rates that exceeded German capacity by factors of 5 to 10. Colonel Chester Hansen entered with intelligence assessments from captured German documents. "General," he reported, "their logistics officers are recommending immediate withdrawal. They can't sustain current casualty rates for more than 72 hours without complete organizational breakdown." Bradley studied the intelligence summaries, noting German ammunition shortages and fuel constraints that limited their tactical options. The Wehrmacht's motor transport system relied heavily on horse-drawn vehicles and captured equipment, making sustained operations impossible when faced with American artillery that could destroy supply columns at ranges exceeding 30 kilometers. The strategic implications extended beyond the Ardennes battle. German forces throughout Western Europe were experiencing similar resource constraints, while American strength continued growing as production lines delivered new equipment and trained replacements. By conservative estimates, German combat effectiveness was declining by 10% monthly, while American capabilities increased proportionally. Bradley's telephone rang with reports from field commanders confirming the collapse of German offensive operations. The 5th Panzer Army was withdrawing to defensive positions, abandoning equipment and supplies that could not be replaced. Von Lüttwitz's forces had expended their ammunition reserves in the first day of fighting and could not continue operations. Without resupply that German logistics could not provide, the general walked to his situation map, studying the red arrows that had indicated German attack routes 24 hours earlier. Those arrows now pointed east, showing retreat directions for formations that had approached with such confidence. American industrial superiority had transformed a potentially dangerous enemy offensive into a devastating defeat that would accelerate German military collapse. Bradley dictated his daily report to the War Department. Enemy offensive operations terminated due to unsustainable casualties and logistical constraints. American defensive success demonstrates effectiveness of coordinated artillery doctrine supported by adequate industrial production. Recommend continued pressure to exploit enemy weakness. The report did not mention that adequate industrial production represented the greatest military-industrial achievement in human history. Sergeant Robert Hickman led his squad through the abandoned German positions, surveying the devastation created by American artillery fire. The snow-covered forest clearing that had been marked for breakthrough operations now resembled a moonscape, cratered by high explosive shells and littered with destroyed equipment. German tanks lay scattered across the battlefield like broken toys, their thick armor plates peeled open by direct hits from American guns. The few surviving vehicles had been abandoned by crews who fled on foot when mechanical breakdowns made further retreat impossible. Personal equipment discarded during the withdrawal indicated panic rather than organized tactical movement. Private James Murphy counted destroyed vehicles as they advanced through the German positions. "Sergeant," he reported, "I make it 37 tanks and assault guns, plus maybe 50 trucks and half-tracks. Looks like they lost most of their heavy equipment." Hickman examined a disabled Tiger II tank, noting the precision of the artillery strike that had penetrated its frontal armor. The American shells had been manufactured with quality control standards that ensured consistent performance, while German equipment showed signs of resource shortages and declining production quality. The battlefield evidence supported intelligence reports about German industrial constraints. Captured ammunition revealed gunpowder of inferior quality and shells with inconsistent ballistic characteristics. German tanks contained components made from substitute materials that reduced mechanical reliability. Most telling were the fuel shortages that had forced abandonment of serviceable vehicles. American equipment demonstrated superior manufacturing quality that reflected unlimited access to strategic materials. Artillery shells used consistent propellants and precision machined components that guaranteed accuracy. American tanks operated with synthetic lubricants and high-octane fuels that maximized mechanical performance. Every aspect of American military equipment reflected industrial advantages that German production could not match. The squad continued advancing through positions that had been occupied by the 26th Volksgrenadier Division 12 hours earlier. German field fortifications showed evidence of rapid construction using improvised materials. Defensive positions lacked the concrete and steel reinforcement that characterized American installations, reflecting material shortages that affected every aspect of German military operations. Hickman's radio crackled with reports from other units conducting similar reconnaissance missions. American forces were advancing across the entire Ardennes front, encountering minimal resistance from German formations that had lost cohesion during the withdrawal. The offensive that was supposed to reach Antwerp within a week had collapsed in less than 48 hours. The strategic implications were obvious to any experienced soldier. German forces had committed their final reserves in a desperate gamble that failed catastrophically. They no longer possessed sufficient strength to conduct major offensive operations anywhere along the Western Front. American industrial superiority had not only defeated the German attack but had accelerated the timeline for Allied victory. Murphy E. discovered a German officer's map case containing operational plans for the offensive. The documents revealed ambitious objectives that seemed realistic based on traditional military calculations but ignored the revolutionary impact of American production capacity on battlefield dynamics. Hickman studied the captured plans, noting the confidence with which German commanders had expected breakthrough success. They had calculated correct troop ratios and achieved tactical surprise, but had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of modern industrial warfare. The smoking ruins of the German advance stretched across 20 kilometers of the Ardennes Forest as American forces consolidated their defensive victory. Major General James Gavin, commanding the 82nd Airborne Division, surveyed the battlefield from his command post, calculating the strategic implications of what had transpired. German casualties exceeded 30,000 killed, wounded, and captured in 72 hours of fighting. Equipment losses included more than 400 tanks and assault guns, representing approximately 40% of German armor committed to the offensive. These losses were irreplaceable given current German production capabilities, effectively ending their capacity for sustained offensive operations. American casualties totaled less than 8,000, a ratio of 4-to-1 in favor of defending forces. This exchange rate reflected the devastating effectiveness of coordinated artillery fire, supported by unlimited ammunition supplies. American gunners had expended more than 200,000 rounds during the battle, demonstrating logistical capabilities that no other nation could sustain. The mathematical implications extended beyond immediate tactical success. German forces required 6 months to replace the equipment lost in 3 days of fighting, assuming production facilities remained operational under continued Allied bombing. Personnel losses were equally unsustainable, as veteran soldiers with years of combat experience were replaced by inexperienced recruits with minimal training. Captain William Thompson, Gavin's intelligence officer, approached with captured German documents that provided insights into enemy planning assumptions. "General," he reported, "their logistics calculations assumed American ammunition constraints similar to their own. They expected our artillery response to decrease after the first few hours due to supply limitations." Gavin studied the captured planning documents, noting German estimates of American artillery capabilities that underestimated actual capacity by factors of 10 to 20. German commanders had based their offensive planning on traditional European military experience, where artillery ammunition was carefully rationed due to production constraints and transportation limitations. American industrial capacity had rendered these assumptions obsolete. Factories in Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Birmingham were producing artillery shells at rates that exceeded German manufacturing output across all categories of military equipment. Liberty ships transported these munitions to European battlefields faster than American forces could fire them, creating ammunition stockpiles that enabled sustained bombardments previously impossible in military history. The strategic revolution extended beyond simple quantity advantages. American production methods emphasized standardization and interchangeability that simplified logistics and maintenance operations. German forces used dozens of different artillery calibers that required specialized ammunition types, complicating supply operations and reducing operational flexibility. Radio reports confirmed that German forces throughout the Western Front were experiencing similar logistical constraints. The Ardennes offensive had consumed ammunition reserves accumulated over months of careful conservation, leaving German artillery units unable to support defensive operations effectively. Gavin's afternoon briefing included updates from Supreme Headquarters. Allied Expeditionary Force confirming the broader implications of American defensive success. German military capacity was declining at accelerating rates, while American strength continued growing through sustained industrial production and trained personnel replacements. The Battle of the Bulge had demonstrated that traditional military virtues, tactical skill, operational planning, and individual courage were insufficient when opposed by systematic application of overwhelming material superiority produced by democratic industrial organization. At the River Rouge plant in Dearborn, Michigan, the night shift supervisor tallied production statistics that would have seemed impossible to military planners just 5 years earlier. The massive Ford facility was simultaneously manufacturing Sherman tanks, aircraft engines, and artillery ammunition at rates that exceeded the combined output of German, Italian, and Japanese military industries. The production figures represented a revolution in military-industrial organization. River Rouge alone produced more tanks in 1 month than Germany manufactured in 6, while maintaining quality standards that ensured superior battlefield performance. American industrial methods had transformed warfare from a contest of military skill to a demonstration of productive capacity applied to military purposes. Shift supervisor Robert McNeil walked the production floor, observing workers who had adapted automotive assembly techniques to military manufacturing with remarkable efficiency. These men and women had never seen combat, but were winning the war through systematic application of scientific management principles developed in peacetime consumer industries. The contrast with enemy production methods was stark and decisive. German military industry relied on traditional craft methods, where skilled workers produced individual items according to established patterns. This approach resulted in superior quality for specific weapons systems, but could not achieve the quantity production necessary for sustained, modern warfare. American factories treated military equipment as consumer goods to be manufactured in unlimited quantities using standardized components and interchangeable parts. A worker who assembled automobile transmissions could transfer identical skills to tank transmission production with minimal additional training. This flexibility allowed rapid expansion of military production without disrupting existing industrial infrastructure. McNeil reviewed the latest output statistics. 800 Sherman tanks completed in December, along with 12,000 aircraft engines and 2.4 million artillery shells. These figures represented more military equipment than most nations produced during entire wars. Yet River Rouge was only one of hundreds of similar facilities operating across the American industrial heartland. The mathematical implications were overwhelming for enemy planners. American productive capacity exceeded Axis capabilities by ratios that made sustained resistance impossible once American industry achieved full mobilization. Every month of continued fighting favored American forces by margins that increased geometrically as enemy resources were depleted, and American production expanded. Quality control inspectors Margaret Davis approached with the latest performance. "Reports from European battlefields. Mr. McNeil," she said, "they're requesting increased tank production to replace combat losses, but our current output is exceeding replacement requirements by 3 to 1. We're actually building inventory faster than they can deploy new equipment." McNeil smiled at the implications. American industry was producing military equipment faster than American forces could absorb it, while enemy forces operated with equipment shortages that limited their tactical options. The Battle of the Bulge had demonstrated this disparity decisively, as German forces abandoned serviceable equipment due to fuel and ammunition shortages that American logistics never experienced. The factory whistle announced the shift change, but production continued uninterrupted as fresh workers replaced those completing 8-hour rotations. The machinery never stopped, churning out the tools of victory that were transforming global military balance through sheer productive superiority. By January 15, 1945, the strategic implications of German defeat in the Ardennes had become apparent to military observers throughout Europe. The Wehrmacht's final offensive capability had been expended in a futile attempt to achieve breakthrough operations against American industrial firepower that rendered traditional military calculations obsolete. General Dwight Eisenhower reviewed intelligence assessments at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, noting the accelerating collapse of German military effectiveness across all fronts. Enemy forces were withdrawing to defensive positions behind the Rhine River, abandoning territory that had required years to conquer and fortify. German casualties during the month-long battle exceeded 80,000 killed, wounded, and captured, while equipment losses included more than 700 tanks and assault guns. These figures represented catastrophic attrition that German production facilities could not replace given current resource constraints and continued Allied bombing of industrial targets. American losses totaled approximately 19,000 casualties, demonstrating the effectiveness of defensive tactics supported by coordinated artillery fire and unlimited ammunition supplies. This exchange ratio reflected systematic application of industrial advantages that transformed battlefield dynamics in favor of forces with superior productive capacity. The broader strategic implications extended far beyond the Ardennes sector. German forces throughout Western Europe were experiencing ammunition shortages, fuel constraints, and equipment maintenance problems that reduced combat effectiveness below minimum operational standards. Veteran formations that had dominated European battlefields for 4 years were disintegrating under pressure they could not sustain. Intelligence Officer Colonel Benjamin Dixon approached Eisenhower with the latest assessment of German capabilities. "General," he reported, "enemy forces have lost offensive capability on all fronts. Their ammunition production has declined to level that can support only defensive operations for limited duration." Eisenhower studied the intelligence summaries, noting German industrial output figures that illustrated the decisive impact of Allied bombing campaigns combined with resource shortages. German factories were producing approximately 20% of 1943 output levels, while American production continued expanding to meet increased military requirements. The mathematical progression was inexorable. German strength declined by measurable percentages each month, while American capabilities increased through sustained industrial production and personnel replacements. The convergence point where German resistance would become impossible was approaching rapidly, requiring only continued pressure to achieve complete military collapse. Radio communications intercepts revealed German commanders requesting permission to withdraw to positions behind natural barriers where reduced forces might establish sustainable defensive lines. These requests indicated recognition that current positions could not be maintained against American attack capabilities. The Battle of the Bulge had proven that traditional military excellence, tactical skill, operational planning, and individual courage could not overcome systematic application of overwhelming material superiority. German forces had fought with characteristic professionalism and determination, but had been defeated by productive capacity rather than military incompetence. Eisenhower's evening briefing included preliminary planning for final operations to complete German defeat. American forces would continue advancing across the Rhine River into the German heartland, supported by artillery ammunition and replacement equipment that enemy forces could not match or counter effectively. The war in Western Europe was entering its final phase, decided not by battlefield heroics but by assembly lines in Detroit. On Memorial Day 1950, veterans of the Battle of the Bulge gathered at Arlington National Cemetery to commemorate their fallen comrades and reflect on the broader significance of their victory. Among them stood Sergeant Robert Hickman, now a civilian contractor working on NATO standardization projects that applied lessons learned from American industrial mobilization during World War II. The memorial service included readings from military historians who had analyzed the strategic implications of American success in the Ardennes. Professor John Thompson of the War College delivered remarks emphasizing the revolutionary nature of industrial warfare as demonstrated by American forces during the German offensive. The Battle of the Bulge, Thompson observed, marked the decisive moment when military effectiveness became primarily dependent on productive capacity rather than traditional martial virtues. American victory resulted from systematic application of industrial methods to military operations, creating firepower advantages that rendered enemy tactical skill irrelevant. Hickman reflected on his own experience during those crucial days in December 1944, remembering the awe he had felt, witnessing 900 artillery pieces firing in coordinated barrages that consumed more ammunition in 10 minutes than most armies used in entire campaigns. The sound of that barrage had represented something unprecedented in military history. Democracy's industrial capacity focused on military objectives with devastating effectiveness. The statistical legacy of American success remained impressive 5 years after the war's conclusion. United States military production during World War II exceeded the combined output of all other participating nations, including allies as well as enemies. American factories had manufactured more than 300,000 tanks, 400,000 artillery pieces, and 2.4 billion rounds of ammunition. These figures represented more than quantitative superiority. They demonstrated qualitative transformation of warfare itself. Modern military operations required logistical capabilities that only industrial democracies could sustain, making traditional military cultures obsolete regardless of their tactical proficiency or operational planning. Eleanor Green, now supervising civilian automobile production at Ford Motor Company, attended the ceremony as a representative of defense workers whose contributions had been essential to American victory. Her post-war career applied identical industrial methods to peacetime production, maintaining American economic leadership through the same systematic efficiency that had won the war. The memorial program included presentation of a bronze plaque commemorating the artillery units whose coordinated fire had broken the German offensive. The inscription read, "In memory of American gunners whose industrial firepower demonstrated that free peoples, properly equipped and organized, can overcome any tyranny through superior productive capacity." Hickman studied the memorial inscription, noting its emphasis on systematic organization rather than individual heroism. American success had resulted from collective effort by millions of citizens who had applied democratic industrial methods to military purposes with revolutionary effectiveness. The afternoon ceremony concluded with a moment of silence for those who had died, defending democratic principles against totalitarian aggression. Their sacrifice had preserved not only American freedom, but had demonstrated the decisive military advantages inherent in democratic industrial organization. As veterans dispersed from the ceremony, many reflected on their role in proving that American democracy possessed military capabilities superior to any totalitarian system through the systematic application of productive superiority to battlefield. Requirements. If you enjoyed the story I handpicked, this next story that you will enjoy, please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.